May 22, 2011. A routine Sunday became the deadliest day in modern American history, but it was only the beginning. A mile-wide wall of debris was racing toward the city. The wind suddenly exploded, and in that moment, Joplin was fighting for its life.
Left a wide path of destruction, number of injuries, and according to the Weather Channel, at least 24 people dead in and around the Joplin area.
Imagine hanging out with friends and family at a graduation party on a warm day in late spring. Jamie and his family were doing just that in Joplin, Missouri. Everything was going well. The conversation was light. The sun was shining, and the future felt bright for the class of 2011. But suddenly, the group noticed extremely dark skies to the west. At first, they weren't too worried. It was springtime in the Midwest, and afternoon thunderstorms were as common as the wind itself. But the darkness continued to get closer and closer and closer. The birds went silent. The atmosphere felt heavy, charged with a static tension that made the hair on your arms stand up. The wind began to pick up an eerie, rhythmic moan, a low-frequency vibration that you felt in your chest before you heard it with your ears. Jamie grabbed an old camera and began filming the scene. "There's a hail. We don't need that either," he muttered, his voice captured on a tape that would soon become historical evidence of a nightmare. As the sky turned a sickly, bruised green, the color of a deep bruise on the Earth's skin, Jamie realized they were in a dangerous situation. He urged his family into the lowest part of the house.
Michaela's back here. Oh my God. Get down! Everybody get down!
A desperate sanctuary against an unknown force. Suddenly, a freight train-like noise could be heard approaching, slowly getting louder and louder until it became a physical weight pressing down on the roof. The home began to shake, and the agonizing sound of glass shattering upstairs echoed through the basement. But as quickly as it started, it was over. Jamie stepped outside into a world that had been rearranged. The second story of his home was missing an entire wall, exposed like a dollhouse, but they were the lucky ones. Across the street, his neighbor's house was gone, not just damaged, but erased down to the concrete slab. Jamie had just survived the very edge of an EF5 tornado, a wall of death, a monster over a mile wide with wind speeds well over 200 miles per hour.
Continue to take cover from this storm. We can see that tornado on the ground from our tower cam. We are continuing to track that.
The first warning signs appeared on May 20th, 2 days before the disaster. The Storm Prediction Center, SPC, in Norman, Oklahoma, issued a Day 3 outlook showing a 30% chance of severe weather in the red-shaded region, which included Joplin. The guidance suggested moderate to strong destabilization, a volatile mix of cold air from the north and moisture from the Gulf. It was a recipe for isolated supercells, a couple of which might be capable of producing tornadoes. On May 21st, the risk area was expanded. Still, life in Joplin continued. Graduation rehearsals went on, plans for Sunday dinners were made. No one knew this was the Earth's first whisper before the roar. On the morning of May 22nd at 8 a.m., the SPC issued a probabilistic tornado graphic showing a 5% chance of a significant tornado. By the afternoon, this was upgraded to 10%. However, science has its limits. The SPC believed the primary threat to southern Missouri would be large hail. They were half right. The hail came, but it was merely the curtain raiser for the main act. At 1:30 p.m., the National Weather Service issued a tornado watch for Jasper County. In Joplin, it was Graduation Sunday, the pinnacle of achievement for the class of 2011. Hundreds of families had traveled from across the country to witness the commencement. For many, the EAS alert on their car radios was the first signal of a threat. But in the heart of Tornado Alley, a watch is often treated with complacency. Life quickly returned to normal. At 5 p.m., the atmosphere finally snapped. A single supercell to the west, near the Kansas-Missouri border, was rapidly strengthening. The sky turned an unnatural shade of charcoal. At 5:09 p.m., the first tornado warning was issued, and the civil defense sirens wailed for 3 minutes. KSN, the local NBC affiliate, began live coverage.
Galena is reporting, trained weather spotters in Galena are reporting now sightings of funnel clouds. Caitlin, you were telling me about that just a moment ago.
We really can't see. It is just so rain-wrapped, the meteorologist noted, staring at a tower cam that showed nothing but a gray wall of water. At 5:17 p.m., a second tornado warning was issued for the entire city, but the sirens did not go off again immediately. This 17-minute silence would become the margin between life and death for hundreds of residents who believed the danger had passed.
Yo, people, that is a tornado, and I am getting it on camera. I am getting this cat crap on camera.
At 5:34 p.m., the nightmare officially touched the ground near West 32nd Street. It was not a picturesque lone funnel. It was a multi-vortex beast, a dead man walking structure where several smaller, intense whirls rotate around a common center like the tentacles of a monster. Storm spotter Ryan Carr captured the initial formation. There it is! Oh my gosh, keep me safe, Lord. The tornado organized with terrifying speed, transitioning from a chaotic swirl into a massive, rain-wrapped wedge in mere seconds. The Joplin EF5 was a worst-case scenario tornado. Because it was wrapped in a heavy veil of rain, it was invisible. To the residents on the street, it didn't look like a tornado. It looked like a dark, solid wall of clouds moving across the ground. If you didn't know what you were looking for, it just looked like a particularly bad thunderstorm. This hidden killer moved east, increasing in size and strength with every block it consumed. At 5:38 p.m., the sirens finally cried out again, but the monster was already inside the city limits, shredding the western subdivisions. One member of the graduating class was 18-year-old Will Norton. He was a popular student, a charismatic YouTuber with his whole life ahead of him. He had received his diploma just 1 hour earlier. As the storm hit, he was driving home with his father, Mark, in their Hummer SUV. On South Sheffer-Decker Avenue, the EF5 struck. The wind was so violent it flipped the heavy vehicle like a toy. Will's seatbelt snapped under the G-force, and he was sucked through the sunroof into the vortex. His father survived with severe injuries, but Will was gone. He was discovered days later in a nearby pond, the first identified victim of the storm. The photo of Will holding his diploma, smiling at the camera just 60 minutes before his death, remains the most haunting image of the Joplin tragedy. But the tornado was not satisfied. It was now heading straight for the massive complex of St. John's Medical Center.
Devastation in Joplin, Missouri on an almost unimaginable scale. Homes obliterated. Cars piled up like toys.
Jay Nixon has sent a search and rescue team to Joplin, where a tornado killed at least 89 people last night.
The tornado was no longer a storm. It was an engine of erasure. By 5:45 p.m., as it crossed over Main Street, the vortex had reached a staggering width of nearly 1 mile. It was now entering the most densely packed commercial district in the city, Rangeline Road. This was the worst-case scenario realized. An EF5 tornado at peak intensity, plowing through a forest of big-box stores, restaurants, and strip malls filled with thousands of unsuspecting people.
The bathroom's up there by the front.
Storm chasers, Rich Hamill and his team were trapped in the gridlock of Rangeline Road. Their footage is a masterpiece of terror. Look at those power flashes. It's right there. They screamed as the sky to their west turned into a strobing nightmare of blue and green electrical explosions. They watched as the Walmart and the Home Depot were swallowed by a wall of black debris. These weren't just buildings being damaged, they were being pulverized. The atmospheric pressure drop was so severe it was physically painful, and the roar, a sound described by survivors as a scream of a billion bees, drowned out all human sound. Among the ruins of the Home Depot, a story of ultimate sacrifice was written in the dust. Dennis Osborne, a veteran who understood the face of death, saw the rain-wrapped monster approaching. While others stared in confusion, Osborne went to work. He didn't run for the back of the store immediately. He stayed in the parking lot shouting, pulling people out of their cars, and ushering them into the structure. He saved dozens, but as the 10-inch thick concrete walls began to collapse like cardboard, Osborne was caught in the carnage. He gave his life so that strangers could see the next sunrise. A few blocks away at Pizza Hut, manager Christopher Lucas faced a similar choice. He gathered 15 people into the walk-in freezer. But as the roof was ripped away, the vacuum of the EF5 began to pull the freezer door open. Lucas grabbed a bungee cord, wrapped it around his arm, and anchored himself to the door. He held on with superhuman strength as the building disintegrated around him. He was pulled out into the vortex and perished, but every single person inside that freezer walked away. It is a fact in this part of Missouri that the courage of the dead is the only reason the death toll wasn't in the thousands.
I remember on the shoulder, a hand touched me like right here, and they told me everything was going to be okay.
While the commercial district was being shredded, the tornado struck the St. John's Regional Medical Center. This 9-story concrete fortress should have been the safest place in town, but an EF5 defies the laws of architecture. Inside, Nurse Kevin Kepley and his staff were in a race against time. The windows imploded, sending a blizzard of surgical glass through the hallways. The wind was so powerful it sucked the oxygen out of the rooms and, in a feat of terrifying physics, rotated the entire hospital tower 4 inches on its foundation. The backup generators were ripped from the earth. The life support systems went silent. In the pitch black, as the storm screamed through the shattered wards, 5 patients on ventilators died instantly. The hospital was no longer a place of healing, it was a ruin. In the aftermath, a makeshift tent hospital was erected in the mud and blood of the parking lot. 2 helipads were quickly cleared to airlift the hundreds of critically injured victims to neighboring cities. To this day, those abandoned concrete helipads remain in the empty lot, a haunting remnant of the day the medical system collapsed. But as the sun rose on May 23rd, a second invisible killer began to circulate through the lungs of the survivors. In the weeks following the tornado, 18 people were struck by a rare and horrifying fungal infection known as mucormycosis. These flesh-eating spores had been stirred up from the deep soil by the EF5 winds and forced into the open wounds and respiratory systems of victims. Even after surviving the greatest wind on Earth, 5 people lost their lives to this silent fungal aftermath. It was a reminder that the Earth itself had been poisoned by the violence of the storm.
Take a look. I mean, it's everything. It's just completely demolished. I mean, homes are destroyed. Families' lives have been turned upside down at this point. And people are just looking for their loved ones. They're looking for family members. If you take a look here at this neighborhood.
In the spirit of the city, it started with the children. Dozens of young survivors, independent of one another, began to tell stories of the butterfly people. They claimed that as the walls of their homes collapsed and the glass flew like shrapnel, beautiful, winged figures hovered over them, shielding them from harm. One survivor, Emily, described a calming presence, a hand on her shoulder and a voice telling her that everything would be okay. Whether these sightings were a trick of the mind under extreme trauma or something more profound, the butterfly became the official symbol of Joplin's resurrection. You can see them today. Sculptures and murals of butterflies scattered throughout the rebuilt city. They represent the 161 souls lost and the thousands who survived through luck, grace, or the intervention of heroes. The total damage was staggering: $2.8 billion in 2011, nearly $4 billion in today's currency. 8,000 buildings destroyed, 25% of the city flattened. Yet Joplin did not become a ghost town. They used circus elephants to pull cars out of the mud. They held a graduation for the class of 2012 exactly 1 year later, with President Obama delivering the commencement address. The Joplin EF5 remains the worst-case scenario for meteorology. It taught the world that a rain-wrapped wedge is the most dangerous predator in nature. It taught us that 17 minutes of lead time can mean nothing if people don't take the threat seriously. But most of all, it left a scar on the collective memory of the world, a haunting reminder of a power that shows no mercy and a community that refused to stay broken. Joplin has risen to its feet once more, but the wind still whispers through the empty lots where homes once stood. If you found this documentary insightful, please hit the like button and subscribe for more stories of human resilience. This was the story of the day the sky turned black. This was the Joplin EF5.